being recorded. And I'd like to introduce now, please, Jo Kelso and Karen Workman, who will be delivering this very interactive session today. So I hope you all enjoy, and I'm going to switch my mic off and hand over to them.
Well, thank you very much, Esther. Pnawn pawb, welcome to the second webinar in the series for the ColegauCymru CPD programme, where we're working with you to make the transition to the new qualifications and assessment methods in the GCSE, Welsh Baccalaureate and Essential Skills Suite. You'll have either attended our first webinar when we launched the CPD programme with you, or you'll have been part of a launch event. Either way, you'll have spent some time looking at the first two modules where we considered the specifications and the skills, so you should have a developing idea of what you do know and what you need to know regarding the qualifications and your skills. Today we will continue on the journey by going back to basics, and we'll be exploring content from the optional modules, specifically Module 5, where we will look at knowing your learners and preparing for assessment, and Module 3, where we will be reflecting on our own practice by referring back to the principles of effective practice, and you will be thinking of pedagogy specific to your own subject. And of course, let's not shy away from the digital literacy that you will be developing as you follow and interact with this webinar.
Hello, sorry for the pause, we're just swapping over microphones there. So it's Karen speaking now, so welcome to our webinar this afternoon. I'm just going to move the slide along. I'm hoping you can all hear me now. I think there are a couple of people having problems with the volume. If you can, no, we're all fine now. So you should be able to see on your screen now a flowchart of the learner journey. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this assessment cycle, but we're going to spend some time together today to consider the learner journey through this cycle. I know it's back to basics, but this is a time of great change, as you are well aware, and it's an opportune moment to consider how the new essential skills, the GCSEs and the Welsh Baccalaureate are impacting on our current methods of assessment. Well, we all know that the learners are on this journey, but I'm sure we're all aware that they are not alone. There are other stakeholders and other interested parties that interact with learners during their journey. So we're just going to start our first interaction now. We'd like you to use your text tool if you are on a laptop. If you're on a tablet or a smartphone, which I believe we've only got one participant who is webinar viewer 4, you will need to use the chat pane. But if you're on a laptop, you can use, in your drawing toolbar, you've got a letter T, which is text. I'm going to ask Esther to use the text tool at the moment. So for example, if you might think that awarding bodies are stakeholders that are interested in the assessment cycle, and you may think that they are most interested at the summative stage of the assessment cycle. So Esther's going to be typing awarding bodies right next to the summative cycle. So if you are able to, can you click on the screen using that T on the left-hand side from your toolbar and think about other interested parties that may be involved with the learner journey and at what stage you feel they may be involved. When you've had a go, or if you're not interacting at the moment, oh, thank you, we can see that we've got some employers who may be interested. People think that employers may be interested at the initial stages, so they may like to think, oh, we've got lots coming up now. That's really interesting. We've got employers who may be interested in the initial, the formative stages, and the summative stages. And somebody else is saying that awarding bodies may be interested in the diagnostic. If you, just to say, I'm going to pick up on some of the other comments, but if you've finished, if you could put a green tick next to your name so that we can see when people have interacted. Excellent. We've got some tutors coming in. Parents, yes, for 16 to 18-year-olds. Parents are interested, and I think that's mostly at the initial stages people are saying at the moment. Support staff, I think that's looking at the online assessments. Often support staff are helping learners and feeding back on the diagnostic. We've got lots of people saying teachers, tutors, employers. Yep, we've got learners coming up again. Job centre, that's an interesting one. The job centre are interested where people are for their initial, I think it's nearer the initial one, possibly the summative, obviously if you're looking for work. And again, if you want to expand on anything that you're typing, feel free to use the chat pane. Universities, they're looking at summative assessment. Managers, these are all really valuable. So I think what we can see, we've got a few ticks coming up, so I'm just going to leave it another second or two because I think there are some people that may still be working out how to use the tool. Fran has raised her hand. Fran, are you okay? Can you chat? Nope, she's okay. IVs, excellent. So we've got internal verifiers looking at the formative stage. That's interesting. That's quite right. They come often when we've been looking at portfolio-based learner evidence. IVs will come in and look at the formative feedback. So that's going to be interesting later on when we look at the new assessment methodologies. And we've got IVs looking at the diagnostic stage and at the summative stage. I think we'll take a screenshot of this. I think we're recording it anyway because I think this is quite a useful capture, and I think what we can conclude from this is that we aren't alone. It's not just the learners, that at every stage there are other interested parties, other stakeholders who are interested in that learner and what they are doing during their learning process. So I think we would all agree that it is really important that we get every stage of the assessment cycle, every stage of the learner journey right, which is why we're just going to be spending the next half an hour or so looking briefly at each stage. Thank you for your participation there. So we know that you can all use the text tool, and we'll be using that later on in the webinar as well. So I'm going to hand back to Jo, and we're going to start considering initial assessment.
Okay, well, starting at the beginning, can we think back to the first time you meet your learner? How do you begin to assess their needs? Was it a formal or an informal assessment? As a facilitator for learning, what is it that you need to know? We're going to keep to the chat pane at this stage, but later on we may ask similar questions and ask for volunteers to raise their hands so that we can activate microphones and join in a discussion. We'd like you to ponder on what initial assessment tools you use. We know that there are online and paper-based tools available to assess AON comms and now digital literacy. So into the chat pane, please, so we can capture who is using what. Okay, a face-to-face chat, an interview, talking to the students, again, using the face-to-face interface. WEST and BKSB are popping up as quite popular tools. Now, when we're talking about WEST and BKSB, is that for all three of those skills, or is it for one of the suite? Indeed, understanding the learner's interests and aspirations, and interviews, and chatting with students about their backgrounds. Okay, so gaining that interest in the first place, I'm imagining that there's some type of an application form, so would you consider that to be part of the assessment tools? Soft skills and West literacy numeracy. Okay, we've got free writing popping up. Free writing task on a couple of occasions there. So expanding out, so we're not talking about just having an interview, not just looking at the analysis that comes out of a tool, but also using initial assessment activities. Okay, the chat seems to have quietened down a little bit now, so could you please put a green tick beside your name if you think that you've expressed all that you'd like to share with us on this? Thank you. Excellent. Okay, so we move on then to question what the purpose of initial assessment is. In front of you, you will see 3 thought bubbles, and we'd like you to use your marker to make a mark against the purposes of initial assessment that you feel that you agree with. If you want to expand out, then please put some extra thoughts and rationale into the chat pane. Okay, I can see people have taken the time to reflect and have a good old think before making their marks. Okay. Right, thank you very much for making those marks. I see that some people have discovered that you can change the colour and indeed the thickness of the ink as well, which is all good. So just to say that we've put in to write targets for learning as a distractor, actually, in this occasion. The initial and diagnostic assessments have become blurred inside West, but traditionally initial assessments are really about making a very snap judgment on where a learner is starting from, the knowledge that they've already got before they start on the next stage of their learning with yourselves. It's not really in depth enough to be able to plan a program based on that initial assessment, but it does start to help you decide how you need to diagnose what skills they've got a little bit further. So using initial assessment really is to learn how to get to know your learners. The closest example that we've got inside West is the screener, so it might be that you now are in a position to reflect on expanding your use of West out to include the screener in order to give you an even richer vein of data. Okay, so I'm just going to hand you back over to Karen now for us to take this a bit further.
Thank you again for your participation in initial assessment. It's great to see that we've got so many people interacting with us this afternoon. So we're looking at diagnostic assessment. So I think if you're following the pictures, we've gone from our seeds, where we're just starting out with initial assessment, into our seedling, where we're starting to grow a little more and find out a little bit more about our learners. I think at this point, I just want to say it's really important to say that diagnostic assessment must be twofold. We shouldn't really just be looking at diagnostic assessment as identifying gaps in our learners, but we should be looking for the strengths that our learners bring with them. So thinking back to that first assessment cycle where we can see it's the whole learner and with all the other interested parties. It's one of our principles of effective practice and part of our CPD programme that we recognise that we should be building upon the prior knowledge that our learners bring with them. We should look for the funds of knowledge that they have, not just in their skills, but their experience, and we need to use this to inform the planning. So, can we do this using just an online assessment tool? And are we using our online assessment tools effectively? Are we using our face-to-face, our BKSB, our West, our free writing? Are we using those tools effectively? Are there any occasions when the assessment might be inaccurate, when the results that come out don't truly reflect what we know to be the skills and knowledge that our learners are bringing with them? It could be using an online assessment or using a paper-based assessment that we've got some learners whose attention span differs. There may be in multiple choice elements of guesswork. By the laws of probability, they may get some right. So how are we going to differentiate whether they are making mistakes or whether it's actually a misconception? And I think some of you have already answered that in your initial assessment by saying that you would go on and use free writing, you may practice, do some practice tasks. I think it's also important to mention at this point about the environment with diagnostic assessments. Where are learners when they sit in that diagnostic? If you have completed Module 2 of our CPD, you were given the opportunity to sit West. Now, where did you do that? Did you do that at home in the comfort of your own surroundings with very familiar equipment? Or were you in a public place with other people sitting assessments or with noise around you? I think when we have our learners join us, we need to think about what's an environment that will be comfortable for them if the first thing they're doing is sitting an online assessment. I'm sure that you are all very familiar with that, but this is an opportunity to reflect. Are we making things, are we giving our learners the opportunity to achieve and to perform to the best of their ability? So, whilst online assessment does provide valuable data for many of the skills, does it end at the beginning of the course, or does it blend on to the formative assessments where we see learners develop and use assessment to inform their own learning? We just want to move on to the next slide where we would like you to take part again, because as we said, you don't just have to use one tool to diagnostically assess your learners' skills. There are other methods, and we're just going to do a little bit of a diagnostic assessment with the 24 people we've now got attending with us today. Welcome to the extra 3 that popped in the last few minutes. You'll see on your screen the answer is 4-2. What is the question? So you can use your chat pane again. You can take a minute to think, but we'd just be interested in your response. Now, if you've been to any of our events, you may have done a similar exercise with us, but for those that haven't been to any of our events, I'm going to be quiet now whilst you think. It's quite difficult for me. Okay, we've got some responses coming in. Fantastic. We've got the meaning of the universe. They're going to disappear from my screen. What is 7 times 6? Webinar viewer says 20 plus 22. 7 times 6. Oh, what I'm getting here, generally, from my from your diagnostic assessment, is that actually we have quite a few people here that are very familiar with their 6 and 7 times table. No mean feat. 42 is always one of those tricky ones. Oh, somebody's used their text tool and written on the slide 21 plus 21. So actually, and we've had 2 or 3 people give us the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, which is great. It's showing me that we've got a real mix here. That 42 is meaning different things to different people. So we've got some that I know have read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. We've got a subtraction here. Thank you, Amanda Morgan. We don't often see people going into subtraction. 50 minus 8, and you're correct too. Fantastic. So what I can see here, if I was using this with learners in a classroom, you can see that this activity, oh, Leanne, my age plus the month of my birth. Oh, wow, that's given us some clues there. But actually, Leanne, I'm really glad you put that down, because I think the majority of the maths questions that we had appearing in the chat pane there, you'll agree, look very much like the classroom maths that we would expect to learn. But actually, is that where we encounter maths every day? Or do we encounter maths through words and maths through problem solving? But leaving that to one side, the point that we are making with this assessment is that there was no one correct answer. In fact, everybody that contributed there, you were all correct. But what I could do from all your different contributions was assess the skills that you were using. So I could assess that some of you were using multiplication, some of you were telling me about the books that you've been reading, some of you were using subtraction, some of you were using, were giving me some problems to solve, some riddles to solve. And that's what we call divergent assessment, where we are not expecting one answer, but we're opening this up for many answers, and that gives us some rich information about the skills and knowledge that learners bring with them that we might not get if we just stick to using the convergent assessment, where we are always looking for that one correct answer, which tends to be what we're looking for on the online or paper-based multiple choice assessments. We're looking for 1 or perhaps 2 correct answers, which gives us a degree of information, but we're just trying to give you another option here to experiment with using divergent assessment with your learners. And thank you, we've had a couple of extras there. What numbers can you get when you what numbers can you multiply together to get 42? Very good, Michelle. So it's just another assessment method that we just want to introduce here, and we're conscious of time, so we're not going to dwell too much longer on that because we're going to move on to formative assessment. But thank you again for your participation. I'm going to hand back to Joe.
So a formative assessment is a strategy which should be very familiar to all of you. It'll have been used with learners in the development in their legacy GCSEs, as well as in portfolio production for the legacy essential and wider key skills. However, we do need to acknowledge that the frequent back and forth between assessor and learner, whilst they generate the evidence, which would eventually be presented for marking, was not singled out for praise in the review of qualifications. In fact, it attracted much the opposite attention. Formative assessment is good for learners, but it can be over or misused, and then it loses its long-term benefit. Assessment for learning supports formative assessment, but it insists that its use must move learning forward. There are 3 recognised feed strategies. Feed up, where aims are checked and reiterated with learners to ensure that they are all aware of what they should be focused on. Feedback, where learners are given an appraisal of work they have produced and gaps highlighted for them to fill, and feed forward, where a similar appraisal is provided, but areas for improvement as well as gaps are highlighted to enable learners to continuously improve their performance. We'd like you to view the following clip to give you the opportunity to reflect if you're already familiar with this term, or learn a little more if it's new to you.
Students to ensure that they actually action the feedback that you give them. All of us, when we teach in classes, we have so many students in our class that when we mark their work, and we're all snowed under with marking, we mark their work and we may put on their feedback. For a particular assignment, for example, you need to include a bibliography and references where they may have missed it out. How often do we actually go back and check that they've actually actioned that feedback? Because students will often just see if they passed or failed, or if they're an A, a B or a C, and then they just ignore the feedback. So feed forward is a way of ensuring that students actually action their feedback and obviously then improve their own learning from actioning this feedback. At the start of the next assignment, students have to then put on that assignment what feedback they were given from the previous assignment and tell the teacher that they will be doing it in that assignment. If they complete it successfully, a sticker is then placed on the current assignment to show that the feedback has actually been actioned. This shows not only the teacher and the students that they've had a dialogue with each other about the feedback, but also internal verifiers checking files, inspectors checking files can see that we've had this dialogue between us to ensure that we do improve our learning. Ashley, we've been doing feedback for sort of the last year and feed forward, and obviously I've got some assignments here just to show how simple it is to do it, with just a little sticker on the front of the assignment. Ashley, you're the important part in this though. How have you found it?
I find it really good and beneficial because you're always looking for ways to improve your assignments. You don't just receive it back and be like, oh, I've got a distinction and like forget about it. You look at it and think, oh, I can do this in my next assignment to improve it. So you're constantly looking to better yourself. I think it's really beneficial because, like you said, there's so many of us in a class that you don't get time to do one-on-one chats. So you find out things that you did well in the assignment, things that you could improve on, and it's a beneficial way to improve.
Yeah, and it's nice to have the sticker. You're never too old for a sticker.
Okay, well, I hope that you enjoyed that. That is a former colleague of mine, Sarah Davies, who's a fantastic teacher and managed to pick up an award as Outstanding Teacher of the Year a couple of years back as well. So some pretty good stuff coming from Sarah, and that was for a project that I was involved in, and some of the project team were involved in with regards to quality improvement over the last couple of years. So there's more where that came from. Whichever technique is used to truly move our practice forward, we need to ensure that communication with our learners includes detail on the processes, not just the outcomes or the products. By doing this, we empower our learners to move from passive to active participants in their learning, directing their attention on what they understand needs to be done to continuously improve. It also empowers us to move our teaching, learning and assessment practices to incorporate facilitation effectively. As learners become more engaged in understanding the mechanics of formative assessment, they develop the maturity needed for peer and self-feedback, or ipsative assessment, as they progress to being independent learners. You might be pondering why we chose the image. Well, in fact, you're probably pondering why we chose all of the images, but I'll tell you about this one that's currently on the screen. Well, when we were designing the session, and indeed the whole of the CPD programme, we have been continuously struck by the importance of modelling. The text that's alongside this image on the internet reads, "Establishing a strong root system and strong early season growth lays the foundation for a potentially great crop." So the image caught our attention, but it's really the message the image and the text convey that are most powerful. By preparing the subject for its expected outcome, we will get better results. Clearly we can't move plants once they've established themselves in their furrows, but we can make sure that our learners understand how to behave come their summative harvest time by giving them time to practice their performance during their formative learning and development time. Use summative assessments formatively. Many of you will be aware of the work of John Hattie, and above on the screen now you'll see some published results on effect sizes regarding what has the greatest effect on a student's learning. He says that an effect size of 0.5 is equivalent to an increase of 1 GCSE. So it's interesting to note that by giving valuable high quality feedback, the effect size could be as high as 1.13. That'd be 2 GCSE grades within one academic year. With this in mind, we must consider what valuable high quality feedback can look like. Okay, again, we'd like you to reflect. We'd like you to use the emoticons to raise your hand if you'd like to join in a short discussion. Please ensure that you're using a headset with a microphone if you do volunteer to talk, because that way you'll be most clear. We will invite only one speaker at a time, but don't forget you can use the chat pane as well, because we want to hear from all of you. So if you can reflect on the items on the screen in front of you now, and then get in touch as soon as you'd like to speak. Okay, Leanne, you've mentioned Nearpod, so you use Nearpod as a tool in order to formatively assess your learners, with you communicating their views and you looking at their views and then responding in that way. And Marie, you use Kahoot, so you're checking people's understanding by quizzing them in a fun, interactive way post-delivery. Esther Barrett loves Kahoot, and I'm sure this afternoon we may well be Kahooting in Skewen. This is a possibility. Okay, I've seen many people are typing at this point in time. Okay, Leanne Morgan is saying that Google Forms, and Shirley Hudson saying that there are planned questions. So again, both ways of making sure that learners show their understanding by responding to activities that you've set. Ah, Marie, I can see your life has been changed forever. Everybody else is probably wondering, what on earth is Kahoot? Ah, now, there's some good content for the next webinar. We'll put something into Kahoot. Okay, observation is a good way of formatively assessing, indeed, because if they are doing incorrectly what you've instructed them to do, then there's a gap in understanding. It also gives you a very nice, gentle way of having a conversation about how to do this better the next time that they do this thing that you're observing. Okay, what about the second set of questions here, the whole learner? Who are they outside the classroom, and does it matter? Is there anything that we can reflect on there with regards transferable skills and how they can be used in formative assessment? Okay, Leanne, I'm glad you're agreeing with me. I don't know what it is you're agreeing with, but thank you for agreeing. Nobody wants to speak today. See? We gave the option and the microphones are all silent. Absolutely, Leanne, it does matter who they are outside the classroom because they bring themselves into class. We don't expect them to be different people, so therefore we need to adjust to the people that they are. Okay, we need to have feedback in different ways, verbal and written, absolutely, because people hear a different message sometimes from the one that's been transmitted, or they may read into something that hasn't actually been meant. So indeed, you're absolutely right, we do need to have these different methods. Indeed, they may well forget what it is that they've been told, or choose to not remember what it is they've been told, because it's unpalatable. And this is why it's so important to make sure that any feedback is about the issue, the process is not about the individual. Okay, if we can just move on to the next stage, you will have more chance now for further interaction. In front of you, and apologies for the first statement because it hasn't transposed very well across to the tutorial today. There are 3 statements. So what we'd like you to do now is have a second to read them, reflect on them, and then look at the one that you feel that would be the most useful to a learner to receive as feedback in order to feed forward. Okay, we have a couple of marks now coming onto the screen. Okay, thank you. Keep on marking. People have given up on too many different colours, even though we do have a nice kind of dark purple coming through there. And a blue, thank you. Okay, so generally speaking, people are going for the statement at the bottom of the screen. That is the one that we would say is possibly the most useful for a number of reasons. There are useful comments within all of the feedback because people need to know what it is they've done and what it is that they've got to do. But from a teacher's perspective, the second statement, so the statement on the right, is probably the most useful. But for the learner, in the final statement, it's been crafted in such a way as to say what a strength is without saying it's a strength and attaching it to a criteria. So it's a technique that's being used that can then be transferred to other things, because a weakness is highlighted in the feedback, saying that, well, if you use that strong technique in another area, it's not that it's not great, it's not quite up to the mark, but it just helps to reinforce that there's some positive reinforcement that's been given to the learner about taking a strength and transferring that into future learning. So again, thank you very much for interacting with that, and I shall pass you back over to Karen.
Thank you. I was itching to talk through the formative assessment. I think I'm just going to pick on, because we have got 10 minutes left, I'm just going to pick up on one point that was made earlier in the chat pane, I think from Shirley, about planned questioning. And I know that's something in my teaching I've always found really helpful. Good developmental questioning where we can lead the learning move the learning forward. I often find that if you plan those questions in advance and even make a note of them on your lesson plan or your lesson notes, so that you know the purpose for the questions and that you are leading and using very open questions, which is particularly important as we're moving into this more formative assessment before we reach the end assessment, which is what we're coming on to now, the summative assessment. Thank you for staying with us. Can I just have some either smiley faces or ticks just to show that we've still got everybody in the room with us, and that you're still following. Thank you. Marie's here. Smiley faces from Alison and Anne. Oh, there we are. We've got lots of smiley faces. So I think we've still got everybody still with us at the moment. So, oh, and we've got a big tick on our lovely big oak tree. Thank you for that. So we know, and we've got claps as well. Fantastic. So, summative assessment, it provides the evidence of skills that are held by the learner. Now, as we noted earlier, the legacy essential skill used a portfolio to gather this evidence. But since the review of qualifications, it has been decided that this will be replaced with controlled tasks, confirmatory tests, and structured discussions. So there's now a clear line between the formative assessment for learning to the summative assessment of learning. So there is clearly a need to plan and prepare our learners for this different methodology. And one way to do this, as Jo mentioned earlier, is to use summative assessments formatively. So you can devise tasks and set problems using a similar format to the sample assessments. And if you haven't already seen any sample assessments for the essential skills, if you look at your awarding body's website, I know that they all have sample assessments that you can download and use yourselves and with your learners. And if you can devise some of your own tasks similar to these, marking them formatively using that feed up, the feedback, and the feed forward. And I think that that feed forward, where we're setting targets and we're actually asking learners to look at those targets before they hand in their next assignment to see that they have improved, offering those comments. And the learners will be able to use that information to prepare for their final assessment, because of course, as we know, the summative assessment now must be taken independently. the time for the rich formative assessment for learning will happen before your learners are ready for their summative assessment. Now we do have about 7 minutes left. I think we were planning on going over to a Padlet, so we are going to ask Esther if you've been on any of our CPD. Oh, Leanne's gone, sorry, I'm glad. Amanda, you're still here. If you can bear with us, we're going to again summatively assess now your digital literacy skills by seeing if you can follow with us to a Padlet. You want to open a new window when you use the Padlet. Esther's put a link into the chat pane, and we're going to share a screen because we're going to just ask you a couple of questions about the potential challenges that you might face with summative assessment. But for every challenge that you are going to put on the Padlet, we'd like some solutions. Now, don't worry if you aren't able to go over to a Padlet, if you aren't able to open a new window. I think possibly if you're using a tablet device, that might prove more challenging. We're going to share a screen here. Esther's going to put the Padlet up in front of us so we can have a look to see if anybody is interacting. You've always got the option of using the chat pane. But what are the challenges that you can see with using the summative assessment, the control tasks, the structures, discussions? But of course, for every challenge, we're looking for you to put some solutions. Fantastic. We've got a few people that have managed to move over to Padlet. I don't know if they can still hear me. So we've got one of the challenges, it may not suit all learning styles, thinking of someone taking their driving test. And we've got a time window. So if you put a time window in, maybe you want to expand on that. And we're just going to give a couple of minutes for people to put some more comments into our Padlet. Padlet, again, if you're new to digital literacy, is a collaborative tool. It's a free web tool, which you don't have to sign up for, but if you do, you can track which Padlets you're using. It's real time, so it means that you can have more than one learner in more than one venue using the tool. But as the owner of the wall, we can keep a record of who's been contributing to our combined task. So we've got a few more. We've got, thank you, whoever's on the time window as expanding, are with work-based learners. So I'm seeing a few challenges, and definitely I think the time window is a challenge. Does anyone have any solutions that they can offer for that? Ways that they've thought around it? Because I know as we've been going around different centres, people have been thinking of different ways that they can solve that particular problem. Incorrect choice of tool may be a challenge. So in digital literacy, using the wrong tool can be an issue and lead to a drain on time. So again, perhaps I'd offer a solution maybe to that one. Oh, somebody's offering, I think, a solution to the incorrect choice of tool. Yes, I'm not going to jump in with that one then. Keeping insufficient records, we've got that. I'm not sure where that is. That's going into the solutions or the challenges. Good preparation. That, I think, definitely. I'm glad whoever's done that has moved that over to the solution. I think that's something that has come out time and time again in any of the assessment, any of the stages of assessment, whether that's initial, diagnostic, formative, or the summative. Good preparation is the key. Preparing, as we said, at the initial and diagnostic stages, the environment and the tools that you are using, and certainly for summative assessment, if you have prepared your learners well using formative assessment for learning, that is definitely going to be a solution. Practice, opportunities to try the exams, as we said. That's another example of using summative assessments formatively. Including learning about timing, that's definitely, particularly if you're thinking about the new, moving on to using the GCSEs, and obviously the essential skills are now time bound. Although I think most people will agree that the time has been quite generous, that hopefully learners will be able to keep within that time. The solution for the incorrect use of tool, ensuring that learners are aware of the range of tools available and that they understand which are the most effective for specific tasks. Fantastic. Again, that's pointing back to formative assessment and making sure that we have planned and prepared effective formative assessment, so we've got that teaching and learning space and time before the learners are ready. Right, it's going off the little screen a little bit, but I can see a comment, good relationships with employers who are informed regarding programme requirements. Well, thank you, that's come back on the screen. Excellent point there. That's definitely, again, that goes back to that good preparation, making sure employers who have actually asked for these skills, if the employers have been informed at every process and have been part of the process of the new essential skills, and making sure that they know that learners do need the time and the preparation for the summative assessment. Whole organisation, fantastic. It's got to be between the team, the tutor, the learner, those other stakeholders that were mentioned on the first slide. Oh, if I had some gold stickers to hand out here, I would be passing them through the airwaves, but Amanda's had to go, and we are 2 minutes before we need to end the web conference this afternoon. But just to thank you again for all of those contributions, and that Padlet will be open, padlet.com digital literacy stroke webinar. And Esther's just putting us back to our final slide, and I shall hand back just when we get our final slide back up. I think that should be coming to you right now.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of today's session, and we really do hope that you've enjoyed the opportunity to reflect on assessment today. We also hope that you've picked up a few new ideas relating to assessment and how you can make some changes to benefit yourselves and your learners in the long term. Our next scheduled webinar is about the bilingual classroom and best practice, and will be held on the 14th of January. Please let us know if there are any particular issues you feel a webinar session would be useful for. All that remains now is to wish you all a very happy Christmas and thank you for your time and contributions today. And to thank Esther Barrett for the fantastic support that she's given to us.
It was me who wanted to say thank you to you. I just wanted to say thanks to Karen and Joe. I think you've done an awesome job on this session, really interactive. Hope that everybody had a really interesting time. And if you just want to give them a little smiley face just to say thank you to Karen and Joe, that would be lovely. Thank you. We've got a little bit of applause going on there. So just showing our appreciation to them really for working so hard. So thank you very much, everybody. And a very happy Christmas. I think that's one of the first times I've said happy Christmas lately. Thanks, everybody. We'll let you go now, right on time.